So today I wanted to talk a little bit about the content of our character. I know this is the last day, I believe, of February, which is last day of Black History Month. And I wanted to just maybe touch upon some things Dr. King said, but not necessarily spend a lot of time on a per se Black history topic. I've had several iterations of this sermon, and so here it is today. Let's just see what comes out. Today's sermon title is inspired by one of Dr. King's famous quotes, where he states, "I have a dream that my 4 little children would one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." These words have been quoted countless times, with many believing that they express some of America's bedrock values, those of fairness, equity, and equality. The struggle we face today, however, is about our soul, our individual soul, as well as our national soul, wherein lies the content of our character. We all have a defined character. Who we are known to be relates to how we live out our values as expressed within our relationships and, yes, our communities. For the last few years, a certain worldview, a national character has prevailed, one that seemed to take us away from the American ideas set forth in our founding documents. Lately, our values have been stretched and challenged, and our national character has been under extreme duress. For many of us, there's been sort of a shock to the system, a sort of blood illness flowing through our nation's veins. And with all the negatives we face, there are some positives. We have been going through a sort of reckoning in our society that has called us to re-examine our historical record and the systemic oppression across a plethora of systems and structures. And as a result of such a reckoning, we are also seeing pushback from those who hold power and from others who resist the changes that are happening. There are widespread political, religious, and social breakdowns across the nation, some proving to be deadly. Over the last 4 years, and even recently with the January 6th insurrection, I've heard the phrase, "This is not who we are." If this isn't who we are, who are we then? Socrates conferred, "To know thyself is the beginning of wisdom," end quote. But to truly know ourselves, we must come to terms with and allow for a reckoning or reconciliation to take place around the things we believe about ourselves, in contrast with what others experience from us. We must be honest with ourselves before we can have the national reconciliation that is so desperately needed. Again, what is the content of our character? We all know the stated ideals of our nation, its purpose and intent. The American Creed, which embodies the principles of liberty, equality, individualism, representative government, and private property. We understand what America aspires to be. Nationally, some hold the notion of an American exceptionalism, which is a part of the American mythology. And as of late, and as the late President Ronald Reagan once emphasized, echoing the Puritans of the 16th century, quote, "America is a shining city upon a hill whose beacon light guides freedom-loving people everywhere," end quote. It is true. Many people have admired and are inspired by the liberties Americans are afforded. I think most of us would conclude that we are one of the most kind-hearted societies on earth. But in truth, this character may be experienced differently by different people. What America aspires to be is not the reality experienced by so many people in marginalized communities. While America may be the desired destination for some people, we are not and perhaps never have been the shining light on a hill. For many others, and yet for some others, we have been quite the opposite. Our foreign policies have decimated the farming industries and commerce of other countries. Our indulged society advances all types of abuses, including child labor, to satisfy the demand for goods and the destruction of the natural environment to supply market needs. And while we are known for our freedoms, ingenuity, wealth, and generosity, giving more aid to more countries than any other nation on the globe, we still have more than 50 million people living in poverty in this country. And the aid we give is often not without strings attached. Who are we then? Abraham Lincoln said, character is like a tree and reputation like a shadow. The shadow is what we think of it. The tree is the real thing. In fact, people from all over the world feel things in America are rather dire. The political turmoil, racist police violence, our affinity toward an infatuation with guns, and an embarrassingly terrible response to the COVID-19 pandemic are lending to the negative perceptions of who we are as a nation. And there is also dissonance in what we believe about ourselves and what shows up in the world. Individually, we tend to hold on to an idealized and idolized version of ourselves. For the most part, most of us believe that we are innately good, loving and kind people. I can say overall, I'm a good and compassionate person, and I know most of you, all of you are, I think. But what I think about myself would not likely align with what others experience of me. Jesus asked, "Who do men say I am?" Knowing that our character is revealed in community. Who is it that people say we are? It says a lot about our character and how it shows up for them. I teared up upon hearing the stories coming out of Texas about the recent winter storms there that affected millions and took the lives of many. But amidst all the heartbreak, there came a story about the sea turtles. Turtles can experience cold stun or hypothermia in extremely low temperatures. Their body temperature can fall so low that they can no longer move, eat, or keep their head above water. Basically, they go into a comatose-like state, which puts them at risk of predators, boats, and even drowning. Residents, many of whom lacked heat or basic amenities in their own homes due to the storms, worked long hours on foot, automobile, and even by boat in an effort to locate and rescue cold-stung sea turtles and to take them to the South Padre Island Convention Center. Ed Calm, executive director of the center, told the Associated Press, every 15 minutes or less, there's another truck or SUV that pulls up. Sometimes people bring in 1 or 2 sea turtles, sometimes more. We had trailers full yesterday coming in. Some had 50, 80, 100. Vehicles were lined up for hours, bringing the turtles to safety. I looked at this demonstration of compassion and marveled at our human capacity for goodness. The image of over 4,500 stunned turtles on the convention floor was a sight to see. I realized how truly amazing humans can be. Events such as this give me hope. However, in recent years, I have wondered out loud how so many supposed loving and God-fearing people could feel nothing about what's going on at our border or the plight of the oppressed, particularly in cases of police shootings of people of color. Or one can feel nothing at the name-calling, vitriol, and the bullying from those in power toward everyday citizens. How is it that we can at one point be this caring, compassionate presence and at another point devoid of any empathy towards others obviously in need? Why do many of us struggle to afford the same goodwill to our neighbors or those who may be diametrically opposed to us politically and religiously? In the field of social psychology, there's a term described as illusory superiority, a condition of cognitive bias wherein a person overestimates their own qualities and abilities in relation to the same qualities and abilities of another person. Christians are known for their declarations of salvation, purity, and being loved unconditionally by God, while often failing to demonstrate or extend this same unconditional love, purity, and salvific status to others. They are always on the right side and everyone else, the evil others. We have this deep capacity to express empathy and love towards sea turtles, and rightly so. But our ability to love at times is outmatched by our capacity for the most unimagined atrocities ever invented. We as humans can invent the most heinous ways of torture and exacting pain on our fellow humans than any other creatures on earth. And there are countless examples throughout our nations and world histories. Uniquely gifted with the ability to love, we humans are equally weighted with the power of choice. We get to choose to whom we extend such compassion. The passage in 1 John 3:17 of the New Testament conveys how easy it is for one to simply shut off their compassion. It reads, "Whoso may have the world's substance and sees his brother," or neighbor, I add, "having need and shut up his bowels of compassion." Another version reads, "closes his heart of compassion against him. How does the love of God remain in him?" And we all know this story. It is the story of the Good Samaritan, how people whose work is compassion walked by a person on the side of the road who was in need. It also shows the perfect example of the control and choice we have over our ability to show and to feel compassion. In fact, we have become masters at turning off our compassion. Our own partners will be the first to attest how astute we can be at turning it off, especially when it is most needed. I've spent a great amount of time conferencing with couples who, one or both, were skilled at withholding compassion from their significant other. I had one woman tell me I had to stop loving him so I could just cuss him out. I had a long conversation with a friend about my reflection today, after he learned that there was a part in it concerning my feelings regarding the passing of Rush Limbaugh, which were quite challenging for my friend. I had seen similar sentiment online as well, with many people expressing what his death meant to them. Some of the things they wrote bothered me. I revealed to my friend that I did feel genuine compassion after learning about the passing of the conservative firebrand, at which he presented several questions. My friend presented several questions. First, he wondered aloud how I could have any compassion for Rush. Haven't you heard the things he said? He asserted. He said, what if it was joy that I felt at his passing? Am I wrong? What about the people that fight against LGBT communities? Do we have to love those who are anti-women, anti-immigrant, anti-Black Lives Matter? Am I to show compassion to someone who harms my family member? Then to end his questioning, he says, what about Hitler? I wanted to ask him, tell me how you really feel about this compassion thing. But these were honest questions. I've wondered myself, how is it that we have witnessed some of the most horrific things done to our fellow citizens from their neighbors? How is it that we can be some of the most caring people at the same time see such heartbreaking treatment of the stranger, the disenfranchised, and the disinherited? In my mind, I revisited some of the hurtful things that I had heard Rush Limbaugh say. Although at times his words had been truly painful to hear, and knowing that he stood opposite of me politically and religiously, I still felt saddened. Now, I didn't intentionally call compassion forward or try to drum it up, but I did in that moment examine its presence, and I qualified its appropriateness. Another person participating in the conversation said that I was feeling what I felt because I am a minister, and that's what ministers do. I soon realized that the compassion was indeed there by default, just like it is for so many others, including those who are not clergy. At the foundation of our value system is compassion. And by default, it will show up regardless of the situation or how unlovable or unworthy a person is. Personally, I feel that such a compassion is innate to our humanity, to our being. It defines who we are. It's what makes us love turtles. Jesus said, by the love you have for one another, they will know that you are my followers. And people who actively position compassion at the core of their being may find it difficult not to feel or to just turn it off without effort. On the other hand, people who feel nothing by the suffering of others do so not because they don't have the ability to feel, but rather they choose not to. Anger, hurt, resentment are great tools for avoiding the vulnerability of compassion. I wanted to respond to my friend's questions because it seemed to lend to the larger issues that are occurring in our national dialogue and interaction. First, I told him it was okay to feel what he was feeling. Feeling is what makes us uniquely human. Denying what we feel would be the antithesis of being. If he felt joy at the misfortune or demise of another, acknowledge it. I then asked him, however, do you claim such a display as central to your character, or such feeling as central to your character? What is the prevailing attribute at the core of your being? He said that he didn't know and would get back with me. I told my friend that the compassion that I felt was not necessarily for Rush or his loved ones. His family will likely never know about my feelings one way or another, nor should they care. I feel compassion because I too have suffered loss. And I can tell you, I would not want anyone, even my worst enemy, to have to go through the pain of losing a loved one. But ultimately, I realized that the compassion I feel is actually for me. I am nourishing my core value. I went on to tell him how we as a nation are in a contentious and conflicting relationship with our fellow citizens. There is a segment of the American population that believe in keeping things as they are, retaining the America that they feel is true for them. We don't have to get along in order to go along. We don't have to have the same mind in order to mind the same things. 50 years ago, bigotry was widely accepted. And today, in some parts, it still is. And as I have said in previous sermons, there will always be racists and white supremacists among us. That's not likely to change in this generation or the next. What's different today is that people are again being very open about who they are, for once. And the more they reveal about themselves, the more of ourselves is revealed to us. The more we see our own issues and who we are. When certain aspects of our national character show up, it gives us a clear picture and direction for who we want to be and what direction we want our nation to go into. There are obvious things in our culture that we want to change. What we witnessed on January 6th was anger. Even last summer's Black Lives Matter protests produced some destructive behavior. Anger is good, but that's not the sustaining force that leads to lasting change. We all know that. Although at times justified or necessary, we all know that anger and hatred in the long run will destroy us from within. The Buddha said, hatred does not cease through hatred at any time. Hatred ceases through love. This is the unalterable law. It became more clear after the last election where I stood and who I would be, as I saw the extent people were willing to go to in resisting multiculturalism, equality, voting access, education, and employment opportunities for the marginalized communities. and the right to peacefully protest, I became more certain about the content of my character. After having my race demeaned and minimized over the last decade, I have never felt more confident about who I am as a person of color. I now have more clarity concerning my values and character than ever before. And I think I can say this about all of us. My friends and colleagues, many of you at the churches, have been more articulate and clear about what they stand for. And that is really sobering and refreshing. I realize when goodness is positioned against that which is hurtful or bad, it is like a reflective light that appears. We can then clearly see the path that we are on or the direction we should go. And all the adversity has indeed been but a light if we can see it. What are the values that compel us? Should we have compassion for people like Hitler, who was responsible for so much destruction and devastation on the earth? How are we to be when there is such personal pain and injury to us caused by someone maybe to us or to a family member? It breaks my heart that people choose such painful pathways. I feel sadness because of the choices people have made that have caused so much grief and pain. We don't have to love or forgive or interact with these people. Our compassion in the end will be for those who can receive it, respect it, and who don't abuse it. But ultimately, we and those closest to us are the beneficiaries. And if we are to perceive any of our neighbors as enemies, I reminded my friend of the proverb that reads, if your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink. For in doing so, you will heap burning coals on his head. I reminded him of the teaching of Jesus that conveyed the same by implying that the same compassion that one has for one's friends should reach further, even to one's perceived enemy. I say this because the work that we do for equality and the struggle against injustice, for the fair and equitable share of the American dream, mustn't be compelled by anger, hatred, and violence, fear of another, or even just stark division. We must be motivated and inspired by a compassion that passes all understanding. Let us continue to effect change through compassion and not anger, violence, or destruction. With all that we have been through, this nation, though it has not lived up to its ideals and the promises of its creed, it's good. This nation is good at its core. It is good. And we know that at the core of our beings, there is but good. And we know that we truly need each other. When we feel compassion, we reorder the universe. Without necessarily having walked in an oppressed person's shoes, we can relate to what it feels like to be oppressed. Having suffered in our own lives, we can mourn and deeply feel for another's grief. I don't know what any of us recognize as the true content of our character if compassion isn't at its core. Are we but bitter, broken, and angry people, and everyone else is the enemy? No, we must move toward our innate center, which is compassion. We do so not simply because it is the right thing to do. We do what we do because we feel it as a core part of our truest selves. At the core of our being lies the foundation of all that we are. If compassion resides, with it comes the power to cover a multitude of sins. Let the content of our character continue to stay in dialogue with those who oppose us, working with them, serving them, healing them, feeding them, and choosing to love the hell out of them. The absolute hell out of them when necessary. I conclude with the words of the prophet Khalil Gibran. He says, when love beckons to you, follow him. Though his ways are hard and steep, And when his wings enfold you, yield to him, though the sword hidden among his pinions may wound you. And when he speaks to you, believe in him, though his voice may shatter your dreams as the north wind lays waste the garden. For even as love crowns you, so shall he crucify you. Even as he is for your growth, so is he for your pruning. Even as he ascends to your height and caresses your tenderest branches that quiver in the sun, so shall he descend to your roots and shake them in their clinging to the earth. May it be so. Amen.